in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Ride-On Optics. Ride-On is bringing you high-quality glass at a great value. I use and trust their scopes, red dots, binoculars, and you can too with their unconditional lifetime warranty. If you ever have a problem with their gear, they will replace it, not repair it. Finish up your next build and keep a little extra cash on hand for ammo so you can actually go out and shoot that thing. Find your next optic at rideonoptics.com.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by Dry Fire Mag. Ammo is hard to find these days. You need to stay proficient by working your dry fire training. Dry Fire Mag solves the common and annoying problem in dry fire training of constantly having to rack the slide to reset the trigger. With a Dry Fire Mag, all you do is clear your weapon, load this training magazine, and get to work on your trigger work. Check them out at dryfiremag.com.
Today's guest is Jeff Ratkovich. Jeff comes from the Hangar Z podcast, and he also happens to have a background that is very close and near and dear to the TacTangents background. He was a police officer, a police helicopter pilot. I think he did some fixed-wing stuff too, right? Is what I remember.
Yeah, we flew both helicopters and airplanes.
So Jeff did the law enforcement pilot, both on fixed and rotary wing, and now he does... he's a pilot for a MEDEVAC company doing the air ambulance stuff. So something that works and fits in really well with the themes that we talk about on this show. And obviously he's got a podcast that he is a part of that we'll get more into in a little bit. Jeff, can you just give us a basic bio and background on how what your path was getting into being a professional pilot and how you landed in public safety?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate you guys bringing me on. I started off actually enlisting into the Army National Guard after high school, and was going in to be a medic. Thought I wanted to be a firefighter at the time, and so I thought that was a good path into becoming a firefighter.
Don't we all?
Right. So anyway, funny story. My kid's actually in firefighter training right now at the Air Force. So I have one smart kid. But yeah, so they
like you so much more, you know?
Right. I know. So anyway, I ended up getting into the medic stuff and realizing that the Army had flight medics. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. You know, I've always loved aviation since I was a kid. So I ended up getting into this MEDEVAC unit in the Army and in the National Guard, flying, doing rescues, doing all sorts of search and rescue, flood rescues, MEDEVAC support for the National Guard, which was really interesting. But then the aviation bug kind of took over from there, and I was more wanting to go the aviation route. Still didn't see a clear path into getting into, being a pilot. So I actually went to A&P school, worked as an aircraft mechanic for America West Airlines for about 7 years, and thought that was going to be it as far as my, aviation career. I went back into the National Guard as a crew chief on Black Hawk helicopters in California. At that point, law enforcement had always been something that was on my radar that I thought, I always wanted to do. We moved to Riverside from Long Beach, California, where my wife and I were living at the time. And Riverside PD had an air support unit and did some research, and they trained their own pilots. So I thought, well, maybe this is a path into getting into the pilot seat. And I applied. They went on a hiring freeze. That was back when Arnold Schwarzenegger was the governor, and he repealed a vehicle license fee tax, which then, of course, all the law enforcement and public safety fire departments started saying, well, we can't hire cops and firemen if you're going to take away that money. So they went on a hiring freeze for a couple years. As luck would have it, I got orders to go to Iraq with my National Guard unit as a crew chief. Came back from Iraq, and the police department was hiring. They started me off back in backgrounds where I was when they went on the hiring freeze. And 6 months after getting home from Iraq, I was in the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Academy, and went through the academy, went through the field training program at the police department, did 5 years as a street cop in Riverside, and started filling in the helicopter in a relief tactical flight officer capacity. So going out there when they had somebody on vacation or sick or something like that, started catching bad guys in that TFO seat, which, you know, we always say on our podcast, you know, that's the hot seat. That's where, you know, you're going to prove yourself if you're qualified really to do the aviation thing, is going to be in that TFO seat.
So for people who aren't familiar with police helicopter work, you typically fly with a crew of two, right? One person is flying the aircraft, the other person is running a sensor and the radios, right?
That's
so.
Correct,
As the TFO, you're the voice of the helicopter, you're the eyes of the helicopter, and the other guy is the meat servo, keeping the helicopter
Correct.
where it needs to be so that you can do your job, right?
Right.
Pro tip.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Keep it in the air.
And we always say that. I always, you know, tell the guys like that, you know, as the pilot, my job was just to get the TFO over that scene, because, you know, that's the guy that's affecting whatever's happening on the ground. Most of us start in that TFO seat, and then eventually, you know, if a pilot spot opens up, at my department at the time when I got selected to go to the air unit, all of us were pilots. So it was a 2-pilot crew. So you basically split duties. One day you were the TFO, the next day you were the pilot. Over time, with so many retirements in quick succession, the department decided, well, let's go back to a TFO pilot, you know, makeup. And so we started going back to that, which I guess we can get into later about, you know, the good idea fairies that seem to pop up every once in a while, and we end up recreating the wheel. But there was a reason why we went to 2-pilot crews, and it was for, you know, that ability that if the one partner called in sick that night, if it's the pilot that called in sick and the TFO's there, you can't really fly the helicopter without the pilot. So,
or if one of you has a heart attack or something.
Correct. Yeah, that's always good. Yeah. And we did train the TFOs, you know, to get the aircraft on the ground. You know, we did have dual controls in the aircraft, so that was always something that we worked on with the TFOs. But you know, it made it easier when you had a 2-pilot crew and both guys were trained up. And I'll be honest, like as a guy that liked doing the TFO job, it allowed me to get into that TFO seat, you know, every other day or at least more often than, you know, when I was flying with strictly a TFO, and I never really got the chance to get in that seat as much. So I enjoyed that side of it. I enjoyed, you know, coordinating with the guys on the ground and, you know, helping with whatever it was, whether it was a FLIR search or vehicle pursuit. All of it was, you know, I thought very dynamic, and it's a tough job, and to do it well, it's very rewarding. I think, you know, when you see that canine make that apprehension, or you know, the officers, you direct them to a target in the bushes that's hiding, and, you know, turns out to be their suspect. So it's a very gratifying work. Even as the pilot, I mean, a lot of times you're seeing things as well. So it's not just the TFO. A lot of times up there, the pilot in a multi-agency pursuit, you know, we're both talking on the tactical radios when the pilot has the opportunity to, if he's not having to talk to ATC or coordinate with another aircraft. A lot of times he'll switch over and be updating, you know, another agency on the radio if we're coming into their jurisdiction, or maybe it's our agency that's given up the pursuit to, you know, the highway patrol. So it's a very dynamic environment up there in the cockpit, and it's quite rewarding when you're, you know, playing a critical role to the guys on the ground. A lot of knuckle bumping up there when you catch bad guys and stuff. So
yeah, as a canine guy, I have. You guys hold a special place in my heart because we work closely with air support whenever we're out doing ground searches for guys that ran from the cops. We tend to get involved in any of the pursuits that go on when us and them are on duty. You know, air support and canine is typically always going to be involved in that sort of thing. And there's a, you know, that synergy really happens where there's things that you can see that I just can't from my position on the ground. It's a 3-dimensional world. And granted, it's something that, and this is something we can get into a little bit later, but there's a lot of limitations to being up there, but there's a lot that can complement what we're doing. You can see ahead of us in a lot of ways, which, you know, for all intents and purposes, helps us predict the future in many cases. So it's a close relationship for sure. And I can empathize with the difficulty of the job. I've gone up with them just to kind of see what it's like and get their perspective on things. And it is a multitasking nightmare up there for sure.
It can be, yeah. It's not always just, staring out the window. That's for sure. That's why they actually got away from the term. They used to call it an observer. The guy sitting in the passenger seat. I always reference the right seat because we flew MD 500, so the tactical flight officer sat on the right. But obviously, in the A stars, the Airbus products and stuff, guys are sitting on the left seat. But they used to just call it the observer. The Jaffo, or if you will, from Blue Thunder. But it's become so much more than that with the technology that we're operating up there, the multiple band radio systems that we can talk on. You really, it's definitely become much more than just an observer. So I think the tactical flight officer kind of adds a little bit more to it, because really a lot of times, we're arriving first on scene on, crimes in progress. If we're up and get overhead, a lot of times, we're the first unit there. And so you're painting a picture for the guys on the ground, of, whatever criminal, mischief is afoot on the ground. But you're also arriving overhead at critical incidents, officer-involved shootings, uses of force, those kind of things where there's just a lot going on. And a lot of times the supervisors haven't made scene yet. And so at that point, you're the eyes for the supervisor as well, and directing resources and stuff. And in a critical incident, a lot of times officers have so much going on the ground. Plus, you've got that adrenaline rush of whatever just happened, whether it's a shooting or just a major use of force, or just rolling up on just a riot or something like that. And so a lot of times, even supervisors will get kind of dialed into, that tunnel vision of what's happening right in front of them. And we're up there looking at the big picture. And a lot of times it would just be as simple as like, hey, do you guys want medical aid to stage or fire or whatever the case is? You start throwing out those resources because they haven't thought of it yet. And, you're just up there in the, kind of the comfortable environment of the aircraft where you're not being, thrown all these different, threats or whatever it is that you're, dealing with. And so you can kind of take that deep breath and start analyzing what the guys on the ground need and start offering it up. And sometimes, recommending an action or something like that maybe somebody hasn't thought about yet. And, I think that's really what the guys on the ground, the supervisors, definitely appreciate is that kind of bringing that calm to it.
You have the distance to be the calm one, right?
Yep.
Yeah, you literally you have that balcony view, and so a little bit of emotional detachment from the situation and the chaos.
And that's an inherent part of anytime we have air-ground integration, you see that, right? You see the level of detachment that the air asset needs to have in order to be a useful asset to the team and to build that synergy, but it also sometimes creates some tension and frustration with the ground guys. I've seen that in military. Sure. I have to go back and get my crew rest and my manicures, and they're still sleeping in the mud, right? And
right.
But there's inherent value to that sometimes I think is lost, and I think that's an important point to make. There's a saying in the Marine Corps that every Marine is a rifleman, whether you're a Marine fighter pilot or infantry guy, you start with some understanding of the ground. And you started as a patrol officer in Riverside. Can you speak to, is it easier to make a pilot into a cop or a cop into pilot? We've heard a couple different agencies kind of address that. What's your take on that?
I think we just had a discussion with the guys from Brian from a Low Level Hell podcast, and that was one of the things that we talked about in that episode was, there's kind of a stigma amongst law enforcement aviators that, maybe you see it a lot, like in forums and on Facebook and whatnot, where, a law enforcement agency is hiring or for a pilot position, but they're looking for a sworn, individual. And you'll get the comments that, oh, these, the law enforcement, they'll just take any cop and make him a pilot. And, there's kind of that, I guess, a stigma about it, where what I've seen is the vast majority of law enforcement aviators are, take it seriously. I came from a pretty solid aviation background, as a crew member, as a mechanic, before, becoming a police officer. There are some guys that, the first time they've ever even stepped in a helicopter is when they show up to the air unit. It does happen, but that's why it's incumbent on the agency to train these guys, professionally. You're not just throwing the keys to a multi-million-dollar helicopter and telling them, good luck with it. You're putting them through all the required training that's necessary. And if you look at the military, you're taking, especially, my reference would be in the Army, but you're taking, say, an enlisted member, and you're putting him through Warrant Officer Candidate Flight School, and you're sending him to flight school, and he's getting maybe 250, 260 something hours in flight school, and then he's getting thrown out to a line unit. Now, granted, he's not, being thrown into the PIC seat, but we're not doing that either. In most agencies that I know of, it's somewhere around 500 hours of pilot command time before you're, signed off to go fly with a pilot. So there is some mentorship. There's some experience going on there. And again, most of our guys have come out of that tactical flight officer seat. So they haven't this isn't just day one. They just, get 500 hours and thrown into the helicopter. And now what you're doing is you're taking that experience of being a police officer, knowing what those guys on the ground need, working it from the tactical flight officer seat, and then going into that pilot and command seat. So now you've got 3 different perspectives that you're, now coming at this situation with. Mm-hmm. Can you train a civilian to fly a police helicopter? Of course you can, but I think you're going to be behind the power curve. There's times in that helicopter where I hear something that my partner doesn't hear, or I'm able to get on those tactical radios and put out information that's critical to another agency or whatever it may be, or even requesting other assets, resources that, my partner's, tied up on doing something else. I can switch to another off channel and get a hold of dispatch and start requesting other assets in a critical incident. So I think there's a lot of value to that. I think it would be the same as if you took an infantryman and then made him a close air support pilot. He's going to know what those guys are going through on the ground, much more than just any other pilot is. Can you train that? Of course you can. The military does it. But I think that there is a lot of value in having 2 experienced police officers up there, or, law enforcement officers up there coming at that.
You mentioned 500 hours, and that's just one of the numbers of hours, and the dollar signs flashed in my head. Flying costs money, right? Experience Correct. And training costs money, and sending a guy off to flying training costs money. I don't know off the top of my head what that equals, to send a guy to go get helicopter school, but I know that if you're going out of pocket and going to a local flight school to get your helicopter pilot rating or license, that's a real investment. And
absolutely.
Helicopters are expensive. Good ones are real expensive. Good sensors are real expensive. And anytime we talk about special teams in law enforcement, and we've got several special teams represented here on the podcast, right? We have SWAT and K9 and helicopter just on this episode. Can you talk about return on investment? What do I get when I'm paying all the money into a helicopter? What am I getting out of it? And there's a lot of pressure, as I understand it, when a new chief comes in, or that, the licensing tax takes your money away to start cutting those special teams. And everybody's patrol now. Can you speak to what you're gaining and what you're losing? Can you speak to that?
So our commitment was a minimum of 5 years from the time that, a guy starts in the air unit. He's got to commit to 5 years minimum. And that's to kind of, get that investment back. That's what our department, the number that they came up with. I don't know exactly what the, training costs are in total. I mean, I know it's got to be, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars when you look at what it would cost to build that experience on the outside. And you're talking about, you're taking guys. I was a lucky one that came through when we had a flight instructor in-house nice. At the time. And so all my time is turbine time. Nice. I started out flying the MD-500, and that's my first hour ever logged in a helicopter was in an MD-500. So yeah, it's quite hefty. I think that the minimum of 5 years of street experience before you can even put in for the air unit is, I think, getting kind of that you're paying that for, up front in that experience. There's a lot of people that scoff at the idea of having to, spend 5 years, what we say pushing a hack, driving a black and white. And I think that kind of separates, I think it gets rid of the guys that just want to come in just to fly a helicopter and look at it that way. So you're getting guys that have committed to, a 6-month police academy, a 6-month field training program, a 5 year of, 5 years of working on the streets with maybe the potential of getting, a spot in the air unit. And I went into that, I went into it with the understanding that, okay, hey, we do have an aviation unit, and yeah, there's a possibility I could get into it at some point, but you have to be happy with the idea of being a street cop, for your career, because nothing's guaranteed. And I looked at it probably the way Mike looks at it is that, one of the cool things about law enforcement is you do have canines and SWAT and motorcycles and helicopters and detectives, and you have all these different avenues that you can go down, so that, I wasn't putting all my eggs in one basket to get into the air unit. But once I got there, then of course, that was my ultimate goal. I committed to it for the remainder of my time in Riverside. I spent in the air unit. So I spent 9 years flying in the air unit there. And it, most guys are going to never leave the unit once they get into it. It's that great of an assignment. It really is. You're now off the streets, which in today's day and age, I can only imagine how difficult it is being out there on the streets. And of course, you can exit this career in law enforcement with a bunch of certifications that'll take you, pretty much anywhere. I mean, there's guys that are flying at the airlines that were prior law enforcement aviators, guys flying corporate jets, several of us
MEDEVAC, air ambulance
MEDEVAC
stuff.
Helicopters, right? Doing helicopter air, right? So I'm the bottom of the barrel kind of guy. I'll just go fly medical helicopters. But yeah, there's some guys doing some really cool stuff out there. Flying 747 cargo jets around the world. There are all sorts of guys that came out of this line of work.
And it is a desirable assignment, right? Like that's a sales point. I think for recruits is you may get to work the air unit, you may get to work K9 or SWAT. What advice would you give a young guy coming out of the police academy or about to go into the police academy who comes up to you and says, how do I become you when I grow up? How do I become a law enforcement aviator when I grow up?
Well, first of all, listen to the Hangar Z podcast because we talk a lot about it, but shameless plug. My best advice is get to know the guys in the aviation unit and don't be shy. Don't pester them every day, showing up at their doorstep. And I would probably wait, obviously, until you're off of training and off probation and all that kind of stuff to really start, looking into that avenue. But, there's no harm in going out and saying, hey, I really want to, end up in your seat one day. How do I do that? And talk to that unit, because every single unit is a little bit different. I know the California Highway Patrol, you have to have your pilot ratings in order to, get an assignment as a pilot in their aviation unit. You probably don't have to spend as much time working the streets. I know guys that have done like a year and then gone, because they've come out of the military with their commercial, helicopter instrument rating and gone straight into it almost immediately. But there's a lot of agencies that are 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is. But it doesn't hurt to stop by the hangar and pick their brains. Most aviation guys are, really friendly, want to talk about the job, want to help, get guys into that line of work if that's what they're interested in. So that's where I would start. It doesn't hurt to, maybe go out and get a rating or two under your belt to kind of show that interest if you don't have any ratings. I went out and got my private airplane rating, to kind of show them that I had the aptitude to be a pilot. And that definitely helped. There's some guys that just go out and get their writtens done, just to show commitment, that they're doing something. Yep. And other than that, I mean, as a street cop, work all the areas of your, if it's a city, I always recommend to our guys, work every area of the city while you're in patrol. Don't pigeonhole into one, beat or one area. Work all the areas if you can, because it just gets you more familiar with your entire city. And obviously that helps when you're a citywide asset or, countywide or whatever the case is. If you're working in a big county, I wouldn't say try and work every area of your county. That might be a little bit too much. But if you can't, spend some time looking at the maps, listening to the dispatch, calls in those areas, whatever it is, because that's what you're going to be doing in the helicopter. You're going to be listening for those hot calls when things are happening, when you're up patrolling, and knowing, maybe where things might jump off is always going to be an asset for you. And also knowing the different gang areas of the city, for instance. If you have a gang shooting in one area, who might have done that and who might be retaliating, helps you to respond to some of those things, because a lot of times, like, you respond to
I believe we're going away from gangs now. I think they're called, checking my notes here. Yeah, I don't know what they're called anymore, but I think we're going away with all those enhancements. There's something about, I don't know, they're discriminatory or something. I don't know.
I think that's a key point, though.
Well, see, back in my day,
there's a key point there. Wayne Gretzky, I think. I don't know. I don't understand. What is it? Basketball, whatever he played, was
sports ball.
They asked him, "How are you so good?" He's like, "Well, I don't go to where the puck is. I go to where it's gonna be." Right, and that's one of the keys of chasing people, is know where they're gonna head. And I think that's a key tactical point there.
And also that geography isn't just the terrain, like the physical terrain, but it's also like that.
Who's who in the zoo and where do they live? Like,
exactly, yeah.
Or the dirtbags. Can you speak to any cool stories from specifically doing law enforcement helicopter work? Any cool chases? Any key lessons out of that?
I've worked. I couldn't even tell you how many pursuits and stuff I've worked
Southern
over
California,
the years.
We have some chases there.
Yeah, it's like the pursuit capital of the world.
Did you chase OJ?
No, I'm not that old.
Yeah, me neither.
I was actually on active duty, working on a narcotics task force with the National Guard when
Pretty
that
sure
happened.
I was in elementary school, so
okay. Well,
just playing.
now we're really dating ourselves, but so pursuit wise, I mean, God, there's so many of them. I think one of them that really stood out was it ended up a pursuit where the guy, I'm flying and it's nighttime and we're coming out of Ontario. This thing had kind of gone all over the place.
Is that where you staged out of? Was Ontario or?
No, we were at Riverside Municipal Airport.
Okay.
But this pursuit took us into the Ontario area, and we're coming back eastbound on the 10 freeway. And as he transitions onto the northbound 15, there's this huge flyover bridge. And as he's kind of hitting the apex of that flyover, I'm starting my orbit to kind of come around in front of him to kind of join him as he transitions north. And there's a whole art to flying pursuits where doing those kind of things to kind of keep the vehicle from getting away from you and not losing momentum and stuff like that.
One of my favorite air support isms is we lost him in our orbit.
Yes. And that's what you try and avoid.
Some real tactics, bad guy tactics in there, though.
Right. It is. And sometimes it's just a lack of tactics on the other side, but so I'm doing that. But as I come around in front of him, I noticed now there's a headlight out, and there was a headlight, both of his headlights were working earlier. So then you have that momentary, flash of like, is that the right vehicle?
Car? Yeah.
Well, what had happened was I had missed this part of it.
What had happened was
he rear-ended a vehicle in front of him and ended up knocking out that one headlight. Well, he must have disabled the vehicle. And so he was probably still going about 40 miles an hour. He just bails out of the driver's door of the car, hits the freeway. His head hits the ground. He looks like a rag doll. And both my partner and I are like, oh, he's dead. He's dead. And the CHP comes up behind him. They stop and they jump out of their cars and start approaching him on foot. and all of a sudden he springs up, and both my partner and I over
He
the intercom went,
respawns.
It's a zombie kill him.
both went, whoa! Like it just shocked the crap out of us. At that we were like, he's alive. He runs and jumps over the edge of this flyover and falls. I don't know how many feet it was, but and then we're like, okay, now he's dead. He's dead for sure. And right as he hits the shoulder of the lower transition to the northbound 15, a semi truck goes right past. I mean, inches from running this guy over. It takes a while for the cops to get down to this guy. He was still alive. He had like a broken pelvis, broken ankles. I mean, he wasn't going to run after that. But
if it was a good guy, he'd be screwed. But
oh yeah, right, yeah, we'll die of a paper cut or something like that, But these guys, it was just that was pretty incredible, and that one always stood out as one that, and it was actually caught. Fox 11 or somebody had that one on video and had the whole thing on video, and that was pretty amazing. But yeah, there was, I mean, officer involved shootings, with guys shooting at officers in a pursuit. That was one of ours.
Did you guys get shot at in the helicopter very often?
Not that we know of. We did have a helicopter, and we're actually going to have the pilot of that, John Fears, is going to be on our podcast here in the near future. But in the mid-90s, he was shot through the foot with an AK-47 round flying over a scene. And it was actually, from what I recall from the story, it was way before my time. But they were orbiting like a loud party call or something like that. And this guy came out with a rifle from a nearby house, thought that the cops were there for him, started shooting at the helicopter. They took several rounds.
That sounds very similar to an interview we did with Bernalillo County Sheriff out in Albuquerque. I think just about every single police helicopter shoot down is about the same. They had an MD-500 hard landing off of that into like somebody's backyard, and they didn't even know what happened until they found the bullet hole.
I love the idea that, like, well, we don't know if we've been shot at because fortunately people in Riverside have a lot of things, but like tracers aren't one of them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. In Iraq, we always knew we were being shot at, but over here, not
That's
so much.
celebratory fire. So
correct. Yeah. Right.
So the MD-500, just for those not familiar, most people would know that as a little bird. If you've seen that in movies, that's not exactly what an MH6 is, but it's close enough. My understanding of that is not a beginner helicopter. That's a pretty advanced helicopter as helicopters go, as far as handling goes.
Systems wise, it's very simple. No hydraulics. So it's actually a real dream to fly, but it's very responsive because it doesn't have hydraulics. It's extremely maneuverable. It's fast. It's powerful. It's very small. So it does make a small target. And, but of course, we've had one shot, but, it's a very survivable helicopter. If you talk to the guys that were flying the OH-6s in Vietnam and stuff, they call them the crashing egg because basically the whole airframe is a roll cage.
Yep. It crashes,
and it'll roll. So they say if you want to, if you're in the mood to crash a helicopter, make sure it's an MD-500 because you're most likely going to walk away from it.
Have you had any sporty?
I'm too. I'm like, no, I'm not going to test that theory.
Have you had any sporty emergencies in it though?
Not really. Knock on wood. I'll probably have an emergency, next week when I'm back at work. But it wouldn't be in an MD-500. I don't fly those anymore. But no, nothing real crazy. We did have a run where we were getting engine chip lights quite a bit in one particular helicopter.
A chip light, for those not familiar, there's a detector in most aircraft engines that it has like a magnet and it senses little chips of metal against it. Which usually is a pretty big red flag that your engine's coming apart. So usually when you get a chip light, you want to find some land. I want to
go ahead and put that thing down.
Sort it out on the ground
ASAP.
Right.
Yeah. So our air support guys seem to have, like, I think they call that a Tuesday or something, maybe a Wednesday or a day that ends in Y. but there is a period of time there where they're like, hey, we're going to be out at the intersection of, whatever. If you guys could come shut that down real quick.
That'd be great.
Yeah. I've landed in our convention center parking lot. I've landed in parks, and so we had this kind of like this run of where we kept having these chip lights, and finally we were like, you know what, we're going to stop flying this helicopter. You guys pulled it. Our mechanics, great guys. It wasn't their fault, but they kept pulling the chip plugs, and there'd be a little bit of fuzz on it. They'd clean it off. We'd go back out and fly, and a few hours later we get another one. Well, that's kind of expected when you put in a new engine, or
breaking in
or
period.
maybe as you're getting close to the overhaul time, you might start making some metal. But this was like midlife of this turbine, and so we finally just kind of put our foot down and said, like, we're not flying this thing until you guys
brah.
and our engine vendor was also involved in these discussions, and finally they looked at it once, said no, everything's good. We kept having chips. They pulled it apart again, and they found one bearing that was off by, I don't even know what the dimensions were, but it was so minute, and that's what was causing the metal. They replaced that. They put it back together, and everything was fine after that. Had a couple of trim servos failures over the years, and the first one wasn't anything crazy. I was with one of our mechanics. We were coming back from a maintenance flight, and so because you don't have hydraulics in the 500, you have trim servos, and basically what that does is balances out your control forces. So if you're, it's kind of like I don't know if you thought about like cruise control in a car. You set the pedal and then hit the cruise control, and it just kind of holds it there, and it's going to keep that force in the controls. And so I was flying fast and went to slow down, and as I went to trim back, I didn't have any aft servo, didn't want to go, so I was now fighting that heavy forward force on the controls. Came in, made pretty much a normal landing, but just had a lot of forward force in the controls that I had to overcome. The one that kind of startled me was same thing. We had a trim servo failure. We were in flight. They had just taken off the rotor head and put everything back together. They were removing the head. They were going to replace it. The replacement head hadn't come in yet, so they said, hey, you know what? There's still some time on this head. We're going to put it back together. You guys go out and fly it. But they said, we want you to get some time on it in the daytime before you fly it at night. So my partner and I went out that evening way before it got dark, and said, let's go put some time on the aircraft. We're out flying. We're over the city of Corona, which is our neighboring city. We had a contract with them, so we were flying over their city. And I felt a very hard bang in the aircraft. I felt it in the flight controls. I felt it in the floor of the aircraft. And my first thought was that something's going on with the rotor head, because I felt it in the cyclic. Turned towards the airport. It was only like a mile away, and decided I didn't want to move the flight controls in case something up top was coming apart. And so I just kind of held what I had and just flew the aircraft directly to the airport, and told my partner, hey, we're just going to plan on a run-on landing. If I get down to the bottom and I have control of the aircraft, we'll go ahead and set it down. If we don't, we're just going to run it onto the runway. Turned out it was a trim servo failure, but the difference was, normally in a trim servo failure, you're just not going to have a response on one side. You're going to feel very stiff controls in one axis or the other. In this one, the spring, there's like a retention spring in there and it's pretty heavy duty. Well, that spring broke, and that's the jolt that we felt. But of course, just having the rotor head off that afternoon and everything put back together, I wasn't sure if the whole rotor head was getting ready to come apart or whatever. So that one caused me a little bit of concern. Bringing it back in. I still kept my cool guy voice on the radio. It made my video.
Oh my God, the rotor's off. We're gonna die.
Yeah. It's like the most important thing. That actually brings up a good next question. In working with our air support guys, there's times where they can provide critical situational awareness to us on the ground, but there's also times where on the ground, I have the most relevant, most available information. Can you talk a little bit about finding the balance between when you need to step in and let a guy know, hey, there's a dude right, around this corner or in that bush, versus when it's time to just shut up and let the guys on the ground work the problem? Can you speak to that a little bit?
That's always I think a tough dynamic, because I don't want to, there's no absolutes in this business, and we all know that. I think once the air unit's overhead, if they're first on scene, obviously we're painting that picture. So it's a good idea to, let the TFO get out that info, paint that picture of the scene, whatever it is that's going on the ground. But yeah, once units start arriving, it's hard sometimes because you want to help and you want to get that info out there. But there's definitely going to be a time where the guys on the ground see something that you're not seeing, or you need info that they have. And so you've got to make it short, concise, direct, and then let the other guys have the radio. And, I've been guilty of it. They've called me Rick Dees on the radio back at my department, but you learn over time, I think it's a learning process as a new TFO to when to shut up and, when to let the guys on the ground have the radio. One of the things that I never got into was, and I'd always train our guys on that too, is I don't know what you guys have going on the ground. Say it's a high risk traffic stop. I don't know. I'm never going to say it's code 4, no more units at a stop. I let the guys on the ground say that. If everybody in the city wants to roll to that traffic stop, I will let everybody roll to that traffic stop. I'm not going to stop anybody because, again, I don't know what's transpiring down there, what information they have. And I used to see that a lot. Guys would be like, okay, it's code 4, no more units. Let somebody on the ground make that call.
Code 4 for the non-cops in the room is we're okay, no further assistance is needed kind of thing.
Yeah. Right. So that's always, I think, been something important. Offering resources, but never getting rid of resources. Let the guys on the ground make that call because, again, you just don't know all the particulars to what's going on. But if you see something that you need to get out there, then get it out there. And I think a very good example of that is the San Diego PD video. Kevin Means, he was the TFO where the guy goes over the fence.
That's part of our intro.
Exactly.
And I use that in teaching my guys about what relevant, timely radio calls sound like, right?
Yes. And, do not go over that fence. I had a similar situation. Officer was in a foot pursuit. It was daytime, and they'd been chasing this guy all over the place. He was trying to break into houses or whatever. It was daytime type stuff that he was doing. And they got into a foot pursuit with him. We were overhead. He had run across the 91 freeway and ended up in another neighborhood. We spotted him. Units started in foot pursuit again. He was rounding a corner of it was like a shipping container or something in a parking lot. Officer was, I would say probably, 10 paces away, far enough away that he made that corner without the officer seeing him. And, we know in tactics, pieing corners and stuff like that, but guys tend to forget that kind of stuff when they've got that tunnel vision on the back of a suspect. I was able to put out, slow down around that corner. And what I saw was as he rounded that corner, the suspect put his hand towards his waistband. Turns out he was discarding a replica firearm, but he threw it into the bushes. But all I could see was that movement going into his waistband and removing something. And I just told the officer, slow down, do not go around that corner. He stopped, pied that corner, and the guy laid himself down on the ground right after he ditched the handgun. And I didn't realize what had happened. I just told the officer, I said, hey, just check those bushes right there to your right, after they got the guy in custody. And I don't know if I knew, maybe I did that day, but I think it was the next day we ended up going to roll call, the patrol roll call. And that officer came up to me and shook my hand and just said, hey, man, I just wanted to say thank you for what you did, what you saw, and what you said. It made me slow down and stop. Granted, it was a replica firearm, but it obviously prevented that officer from shooting that guy had he seen him draw that weapon and the replica.
And more importantly, if it was a real gun, then potentially you saved him from getting ambushed. And this is the thing about, so for anyone not familiar, if you listen to, usually in our intro, there's that clip that we play as one of the, little hodgepodge of clips that we have. And there's the one of the San Diego PD helicopter air support dude that's telling an officer that they're chasing this guy that bailed out after a pursuit. He's got a shotgun. He ditches it in the backyard. and then they're about to go over a fence when the guy's picking the shotgun up again, and that's where that comes from. But this is the thing that when we talk about synergy and teamwork, it's not about being the fastest guy. It's not about being like, oh, well, I never lose foot chases, or I'm like the, no one runs from me or anything like that. It's about there's things that the guys in the air can provide to the situation. They can't do the stuff that the guys on the ground can do, right? And the guys on the ground can't see or do the things that the guys in the air can do. So together everyone accomplishes more, right? Oh,
That's right. Well, speaking of,
but seriously, it's that's a real thing.
And speaking of bringing resources to bear, there have been a couple instances over the last couple of years where we've talked about having to shoot from the helicopters. San Bernardino, during the regional center shooting, I remember the helicopter traffic saying, "Hey, I sent my TFO to the back with a rifle. We're going to engage them." I don't think they ended up doing it, but it was an option. Can you speak to uses of force from the helicopter, or have you ever had to land on a guy and grab him, anything like that?
I haven't. We've landed off site to address issues and stuff like that. We have had officers. We had years ago had a crew that landed and the TFO got out. It was a deputy that was in foot pursuit, and I forget. I think it was like the deputy had chased this guy for like going on a mile because they're out in the county. It's long response times for back, and they finally landed, and the TFO eventually caught the suspect, and because the deputy was at that point pretty gassed after chasing this guy for as long as he did. But we didn't have an airborne use of force program at our department. It seems like every time we've gone down that road to start that process, somebody either changes out, in command, and we lose that cheerleader that was, pushing for that program. The 500's a little bit more difficult to do aerial use of force from, just based on the seating configuration with the pilot on the left side and the TFO on the right.
Gotta get the surfboard at the back. I know some guys.
Yes. Yeah, I know. Yeah. It can be done. And, most agencies now, like, San Bernardino, Ontario PD, most of them are flying A-stars. They've got sliding doors, and it's a quick,
transition.
We always have to think about those kind of, scenarios. Do you have time to go back and put a Tyler bench on the side of the aircraft? Do you keep an aircraft, staged with the Tyler bench? A lot of times these things are happening, at real time, where you don't have time to go back and reconfigure an aircraft and do all these things to, show up with all the Huya gear. And so you have to be able to, it has to be something that is ready to go and ready to deploy almost immediately. And the agencies that are successful with that are guys like San Bernardino, guys like Ontario, that have set up these programs to where, all their crew members are trained in airborne use of force. Yeah, they can land and pick up a SWAT guy, but, the TFO is just as capable of delivering those rounds if necessary, and make it so that it's something that can be done almost immediately. The shooting of Officer Moye, the highway patrol officer, a couple years ago back in Riverside, when he was shot, our crew landed on scene and picked him up. And that was something that we had just started training for. And again, we're going back to, is the 500 the perfect aircraft for, medevacs? No, not in the least bit. But if there's a situation,
can you get you to a trauma center? Yep.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
My cousin was my cousin's a CHP sergeant. He was actually the incident commander on that shooting. I got to drag him on here one of these days.
There you go. Unfortunately, there wasn't much that could be done for him, regardless. But our crew, made an effort and landed on scene to pick him up while they hadn't even really cleared the suspect at that point. They knew he was down, and they had officers covering him while the crew came in and picked up Moye. But those are things that we trained for, because those are things that we identified and said, hey, okay, so we have an officer that's down. We have 2 trauma centers that are very close, considering even with the rapid ability of, AMR to be on scene just about anywhere in our city within, a quick time. how long is it going to take him to get to the trauma center from that scene?
Best case scenario.
Yep.
Yeah. And so we said, let's start training for that. And so we did. So we started training on configuring the aircraft, keeping a trauma kit in the aircraft, similar to what we're carrying in the cars, for a shooting victim. The trauma kits that we were carrying, for like another officer getting hit. So we started carrying those in the aircraft. We started carrying a drag bag that we could, grab somebody, pull them into the aircraft, the TFO. So we had just briefed this and just trained on this. And then within a month or two, this incident happened. And it wasn't perfect. There was a lot of things that could have been done better, but that's what we do as law enforcement, right? We're always going to go back and pick that apart and go, okay, what could we have done better, in that situation? And, some lessons learned from that. And if we have to do that again, then, we've now identified what we could have done better, and now we're going to go and do it better next time. But all in all, it was just, that was a situation that we just recently trained on, and then next thing you know, it's getting thrown into the works. So
yeah, it's a case study I want to get into, and I mentioned my cousin was very involved in that, and I know obviously it's might be a little too fresh.
Sure.
And my sister was actually my sister was working for AMR at the time and was at the I can't remember. Did they go to Arrowhead or Riverside Regional?
No, they went to Riverside Regional out in Moreno Valley.
And I think they were there dropping another patient off when they arrived. So pretty chaotic and kind of close to me in a weird roundabout way. I mean, that area I grew up in, I used to work for AMR out there.
And so it's amazing how small the world is, right? You were talking about the Pursuit earlier, and I know exactly the flyover you're talking about with the Pursuit.
And you're like, and that's like the final approach path of Ontario.
I used to take dates to the Ontario Mills Mall back in the day, so tracking.
Yeah. We started talking about some MEDEVAC stuff, and that was actually a good segue. So now you're doing some air ambulance MEDEVAC stuff in a completely different part of the country. Yep. And can you talk about some of the challenges that are, or I guess similarities and differences between aviation and those roles, between law enforcement and doing the air ambulance MEDEVAC thing?
Yeah, I think obviously we do respond to trauma scenes, shootings, and car accidents and whatnot.
But you got to land a lot more.
Yes. We're always landing. So it's funny. I'll tell this story really quick, because here I am. I come out of law enforcement, come into EMS. My first flight with our company, my first patient flight was launching on it was a multi-state vehicle pursuit that the Kentucky State Police had brought across the border into Tennessee, which is where I'm flying at, northwest corner of Tennessee. And they ended up on an off ramp, or an on ramp actually, and the suspect started ramming police cars. And I may or may not have seen the video that was shot by a bystander of this officer-involved shooting, but all these cops are shooting at this suspect. And so we didn't know this at the time. All we knew is that we were responding for a possible gunshot victim with police on scene, an officer-involved shooting. And we didn't even know if it was the officer, a suspect that was hit at the time. So, but we're like, okay, somebody's been shot. We're going to this call. So we start flying there, and we get our guys in the back, get in contact with the medics in the ambulance. And they're like, oh yeah, we got this male, blah, blah, blah. It's not an officer. And he's got a laceration to his neck. And we were like, he didn't get shot? No, he didn't get shot. Turns out they all shot at him. He was a murder suspect, and he took a knife to his neck and tried to commit suicide by cutting his neck. He wasn't successful. And we landed on the highway. They ended up spending an inordinate amount of time in the ambulance. Finally, they come out. We're going to take him to Memphis to the trauma center. And they've got him intubated, and they're breathing for him and doing all this stuff. And we fly him to the hospital. I see his foot move a couple of times and land, drop him off. We're coming back. And that's when the med crew said, yeah, when we got in the ambulance, he was conscious and talking to us. And they said the one of the medics in the back of the ambulance said, "Hey man, if we take these cuffs off of you, are you going to be cool?" And he's like, "Nah, man, I'm going to kill every one of you in this ambulance." And so then they sedated him and intubated him and kept him alive.
Cool
in the
story, bro.
helicopter. Yeah, I was like, man, that's some good stuff right there. But then the other thing I said was, I'm really glad you guys told me this after we got him to the hospital, because I probably would have screamed when I saw his foot move.
Dick.
But yeah. But that was my introduction into emergency medical aviation. But haven't had any exciting flights like that since.
What type of helicopter are you on now?
I'm flying a Long Ranger, a 206 L4 Bell Long Ranger. So not the sexiest, fastest, biggest helicopter that's out there doing.
Hey, when I'm really hurt and
medicine,
you come get me, it's the fastest, sexiest helicopter I ever saw. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And our company, I'm probably not at liberty to say the name of it, but I'm sure most people that know airborne EMS know already what company I work for when I say what helicopter I fly. But our company was started as a rural, helicopter air ambulance company. And what they saw was that, most of the medical helicopters were based in the big cities and had to fly from the big city out to the country to pick up that person that's been involved in a, farm tractor, accident or whatever the case is, and then return back to the big city with them. Well, now you've cut that golden hour down because you've flown all the way out there.
I've
right?
seen exactly that. Yeah.
So we're a community-based, helicopter air ambulance company, and so our bases are all mostly in rural areas, and we're close to where the trauma is going to happen and get those patients to the hospital. So the nice part about it is that we are a part of those communities that we serve. And much like the cops and the deputies and the fire department and the, EMS, all the med crews live in the areas that we serve. Most of the pilots, we come from different areas, but you very quickly become a part of that community, the fiber of that community because of what you're doing. And you really become attached to that community by serving in it. And I'll tell you, it's probably the most job satisfaction I've ever had is when you're, serving in a small town like this of 1,300 people. Granted, we cover a much larger area and of Southwest Kentucky and Northwest Tennessee and even into Missouri. But when you go into town and you're talking to somebody and they're like, "Oh yeah, you guys flew my kid to the hospital when he had an ATV accident," and they're so appreciative of that. Just about everybody in that community has had somebody that they know or a family member that's been flown,
taking the ride.
And what you don't, coming from a large metropolitan area like Southern California, I thought, man, why do they have all these damn helicopters all over the country? I mean, good for me, right? I got a job, but I didn't realize, you don't think about it until you get into these rural communities and realize that the little hospital in town isn't going to be able to do anything for a heart attack, a stroke, or just about any, major, any kind of trauma. And then when you start looking at the distances to those trauma centers and to those higher levels of care, and you realize that, oh, that's a 3-hour ambulance ride to the trauma center or a 2-hour ambulance ride to the trauma center, and it's a 45-minute flight in the helicopter, you realize the importance of why there's so many of our helicopters, through the Midwest and the South, is because of that, and getting people that next level higher care, and having critical care nurses and paramedics that are probably some of the best trained in the business, taking care of these folks in the back. It's job satisfaction like I couldn't even imagine.
You mentioned something that it sounds simple when you say it, but it's pretty profound. The idea that it takes twice as long to take a helicopter from a major city out to the point of injury and then back. That reminds me of a lot of cases where I have had to explain to colonels and generals seemingly basic things about aircraft, like airplanes don't like to fly when it's really, really hot. They don't like to fly when it's really heavy or high or whatever.
Right.
Can you speak to, on both the law enforcement and the medical side, what any senior leader should know about how to deal with the helicopter, or considerations for how to best use the helicopter?
I think the best advice I can give, and one of the analogies that I've always used in law enforcement, is that, a division, and I'm going to start talking Army speak, Jim. Sorry, but a division commander, the general doesn't understand aviation. He's an infantry guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's the 101st Airborne Division commander. He may not understand aviation because that's not the area that he came out of. And one of the biggest challenges that I think law enforcement faces, especially smaller airborne law enforcement, units face, is that the chief of police and the captains and the assistant chiefs and stuff like that, these guys all know law enforcement. They know everything about tactics and SWAT and all this stuff. Most of them have never served in the aviation unit, but now they're the ones that are making those decisions. And we saw it in my unit specifically, from our sergeant, lieutenant, all the way up. Nobody has ever served in an aviation capacity, but they're the ones that are making all those decisions. That general doesn't make those aviation decisions by himself. He's relying on his subject matter experts, and those are the guys coming out of that, whatever his combat aviation brigade is. He's going to have advisors on that. And one of the things that always seemed to be a roadblock for us was that we were never included in those discussions, and that was one of the reasons that I ended up just kind of walking away from law enforcement. Was I was trying to fight those battles.
Mm-hmm.
There were some other issues. They made some really horrible personnel decisions, and finally, when I spoke up about it, that ended up, kind of blowing up in my face. And I'm not going to get into all of that, but it got ugly, and I think there was a lot of damage that was done, not necessarily to me, but I think my wife was like fed up with it and said, "You just need to get out of there. Like, you're never going to change that place. It's always going to be that way." And so finally, I saw the writing on the wall, and I found an opportunity, and Tennessee called my name, and here I am. I got out of California and made it to free America. So I'm more than thankful for that. But
it is not an accident that everyone speaking to you on this podcast started in California and isn't
right.
there anymore.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
No offense, of course, to my friends and family in California.
Never going back.
Yeah, love you guys, but
come to Arizona. It's better here.
Yes,
or Tennessee or wherever.
Yeah.
But those commanders, if they're not going to educate themselves, they need to rely on those subject matter experts to help them make those decisions. And I'm not saying you got to turn over the command of anything to the aviators, but you need to include them, because there was a lot of really poor decisions that were made, a lot of equipment decisions that were made that weren't being made by the aviators. And even when we brought it up, we were being told like, "Oh, they don't want you in those discussions," or, "Oh, we already took care of this and this is the way it's going to come." And we ended up with an airplane that wasn't optimally configured for what we were doing. We made it work.
Yeah.
And you guys posted that quote. I just quoted you guys on it on our last podcast about, it's not the equipment, it's the personnel. I think it was what was it, 10th Special Forces Group or first?
Probably.
You guys posted it on Facebook, but the quote was that, the people are the most important
Humans before
asset.
hardware, and people ideas hardware.
Yes.
Those are big for us. And
and you can overcome a lot of obstacles with a shoddy. I mean, we did it. Our airplane was not configured the way it should have been. It was not sent to the right vendor. The company that was doing the work had never done a ISR. They've done ISR aircraft, in the past, but not for law enforcement. And we were saying, "Hey, send it to this vendor. They do law enforcement. They do all the DEA, all the FBI aircraft. They know how to set up that rear TFO suite to the way it needs to be." And the sergeant, who was not one of us, had never done our job, was the one making these decisions and kind of left us in the dark. And then we got handed this aircraft that we were like, "Oh, this sucks, but we'll make it work."
Thanks for your help.
And that's where you see I think probably the best part about airborne law enforcement is sometimes guys are working with stuff that's old, outdated equipment, but they're still making it happen. And I think that's because of the caliber of people that we select. And you have to be cognizant of that and select the right people, because you guys, I'm sure, have talked about small unit dynamics and how you integrate people into that. And if you don't integrate the right people, the whole thing can fall apart. And that's basically what happened at my department. Was kind of the wheels fell off of the place for a while because of some really bad leadership decisions.
And that's a battle I see all the time. I've seen it all over my career of at the user level, you got to make do with what you got. You're never going to have the perfect aircraft ever. There's always going to be some glitches and flaws, and the human factors will always be trash. And a lot of times parts will get Frankensteined on. Oh, they bolted on this radio, or they bolted on this jammer, or whatever. There will always be a little bit of that, but you have an obligation as the operator to communicate that up and try to force a disciplined design and configuration process, right? And one of my favorite sayings about leading the special teams is nothing about us without us. We don't want people making decision for the canine who've never had a dog, let alone like a working dog, right? We don't want people making decision for the helicopter who've never had to, bet their life on a helicopter. And
correct.
And I thought you put it well. Like it's not that we want to take the command from you or the decision from you, but you gotta at least listen to us. Nothing about us without us.
You gotta make an informed decision, and I don't know how you do that without having somebody in the room that knows exactly what they're talking about. And I've got an example of that. The Churchill mapping system. We were wanting to go to that augmented reality mapping system, and it's phenomenal. And so one of our guys in the unit, he's a genius, but my buddy Steve Quinn sat down and said, hey, we started kind of kicking around the ideas of how can we sell this to the department. And one of the things we came up with was school maps. We've got paper school maps. You respond to a school, you get the address, you plug in the address, the camera goes right to it. You're looking at a school, but you don't know where classroom 6 is or where the science room is or any of those things. And if you're responding to an active shooter at a school, that's critical information. And from the helicopter, you want to know where that stuff's at, right? Because a lot of times you're going to be directing those ground teams towards that area if that's where the threat's coming in at. The other thing, and one of the other kind of more likely scenarios is school burglaries. They happen at night. Usually the helicopter's first on scene. Well, we're looking at an entire school campus and we don't know where that room that's getting broken into is. It'd be nice to know. So we talked to Churchill and we said, is it possible to make school maps? And they said, yeah, absolutely. You give us whatever data you have, maps, put it together, and we can, you put it into a GIS system.
Is just one more layer.
We can get you that data, right? So Steve spent about, I would say, easily 6 months working on this. He got with all the school resource officers. We got all these maps together. He started going through, he got trained by our GIS folks because they didn't have the staffing to do it. They put the program on his computer. And anytime he was at the hangar, not flying, he was in there mapping out these schools. We put together a demo video. We had our friends over at Ontario PD come over and get some shots of the school because they had the Churchill system, sent the data to Churchill, that video. They put those overlays on it. We took it, Steve took it in to this meeting. Now, mind you, we've been told for years, like, the command staff, they don't want you guys in these meetings. They don't want to hear. Finally, they said, okay, they're going to give you 20 minutes. He was in there for over an hour. And by the time he left there, they were like wanting to throw money at him because he went in there with not only the video, but was able to, sit there and answer every single question that these guys had about how this equipment operates, what are the uses, we had for it. And we walked out of there with the funding that we needed and, and pushing for a grant to get this equipment in addition to funding. And we got those Churchill systems on all of our aircraft.
A picture is worth $1 million. That's staffing we need, lesson number one. I have a follow-on on that. One of my bigger accomplishments, and it's silly to even describe it like that. I used to work on a bombing range, big tactical training range with ground maneuver and stuff, and very desolate, way out in the middle of nowhere. And I knew we were going to get injuries because that's the nature of tactical training. You're going to get injuries, and some of them are going to be nasty. And we were fighting a golden hour problem, exactly what you described, very rural environment. Took a long time to get the helicopter there, long time to get it to a trauma center. And I took it on myself to go find the MEDEVAC helicopter guys and give them a map of the range so that when I said, hey, I've got an injury on training area 1, they knew where that was. And sometimes getting off your ass and going and talking to people is huge. And anyway, I was inspired by that because it was simple knowing where to look when things get weird, right?
And that was another saying that, a lot of times, like, we would our own narcotics unit, we would do surveillance, but we did surveillance for a task force, and some of the folks in our own narcotics unit didn't know the capabilities that we had to be able to do, covert surveillance. And at the time, we were using a helicopter, but finally, one of our guys that was on that task force came back to our own in-house narcotics team and was like, "Well, have you guys called the helicopter?" And they were like, "Well, no, why would we do that? Because they can do that." They can't. Nobody knew. A lot of people at our department didn't know the kind of covert surveillance capabilities that we were doing it on a daily basis. I mean, you asked me about pursuits. I worked a pursuit from 5,000 feet in a helicopter on a pair of binoculars one time in Orange County, and got the suspect in custody. And it was after it was a dope surveillance. And
that sounds nauseating.
It was interesting because I was having to ask my partner for, like, what freeway are we over right now? Because I was fairly new at it, but we got the
micro
guy in custody.
view and micro view.
Yeah. it was different, but and so we had a lot of capabilities, and we were able to expand on those once we got the airplane and doing some really, really good surveillance work for not only doing narcotics, but I guess we're not doing that anymore, but gangs. They were where they would
most
go
areas probably are. I just think
they were going into inaccessible areas for detectives to get into, sovereign Indian reservations and stuff like that, to do major firearm sales. Well, guess what? There was an airplane overhead videoing every move that they made, and that was critical to that case. And these were things that the guys were shocked that we could do. And then once they found out about it, we couldn't even take a break, because they were just always requesting us for stuff, and we were happy to do it because it really shows the worth and the value of those assets that we have.
Yeah, a little education goes a long way. Bringing people for ride-alongs, like both for patrol and on the aircraft.
Something I didn't. This is just a total random side thought, but something I forgot to bring up when we were talking about use of force from the helicopters is, and I don't want to give any secrets away to any of the prisoners that might be listening to our podcast in prison or anything, but
hi guys.
There's what up?
What's up?
There's some federal agencies with some bigger helicopters that let's suppose you're a group of people in the desert and they don't want you to run around a whole lot. Their rotors can help pin you down pretty well.
Yeah.
The whole arc there, people, ideas, hardware, I thought was interesting.
One thing about your surveillance comments. First off, the idea of getting capabilities briefings out there, like sit everyone down. Hey, this is what we can do. This is what we can't do. Just that basic education, I think, makes a big difference. Also, it's funny in 2021, 2022, it's still a big deal to buy a sensor package and attach it to an aircraft, but the Civil Air Patrol has sensor balls on their Cessnas. We have the technology. We can do it now. And I think it's worth just, sometimes we have to remind ourselves that things that were a big deal 20 years ago are normal now, have been normalized. So
I don't think it's to the point in Europe where, you've got cameras on every corner. Unless it's like a regular business, I know in our city, they were putting in surveillance cameras, like in areas where they were having, maybe shootings and stuff like that. They'd put up a camera in some trouble areas. But, I think people sometimes don't realize, and I think it's one of those, we're always going to fight those battles, because you're always going to have the folks that, the conspiracy theorists that think that we're just up there surveilling everybody. And this, no, the people that we're up there surveilling are very bad people doing very bad things.
Yeah, and there's a natural, desire to be left alone and right to privacy. Sure. And I respect that as a libertarian myself. I don't want people watching me pick my nose or whatever the hell it is I do in my backyard.
You're not driving across the border with, 100, 200 pounds of methamphetamine in a load car and then bringing it into the, Los Angeles area and working on a distribution network either.
Or
And those are the
underage
kind of folks
kids
that we were
or
following.
explosives or whatever, right? So
Yeah, and
Right.
sometimes, at least for us, it's not even the really bad people. Sometimes it's the loud party calls that people just need to like get on about their night and start to scatter and disperse. And it's Friday night. We have calls stacking up and no cops are available. And the air guys can just run over there and hit it with the spotlight and let them know that, hey man, you guys are on the radar. And people start like, maybe it's time to go. You know, like what the ghetto birds overhead. Why don't we go ahead and head out?
That's why I always called it the beam of suspicion. You know, when we put it on somebody and they're like, okay, we're not going to do that anymore.
And they can clear out parties way faster than like if I take a couple buddies and go knock on the front door and be like, hey guys, can you neighbors are complaining. You know, it's just those guys can get people to scurry like cockroaches just as good as anybody. And again,
Well,
that's
when
just your
you
loud
start
party
telling them
calls.
that the tow trucks are on their way and they're going to start towing cars and stuff, that usually does the trick. So
that's right.
Well, I think we did a good job here of hitting a lot of people ideas, hardware stuff. I love the aviation examples, and obviously this is a good way to hit the parallels between aviation, public safety, and even a little bit of military stuff sprinkled in there. Obviously, Jeff, you want to tell us a little bit about your guys' podcast and what it's about and where they can find it?
Yeah, so John Gray is a pilot for the Ontario Police Department, and he started it back last August. And what he was looking for is, you know, you had hit on it earlier about what can guys do to, you know, get into an aviation unit, and he saw a need there where there's folks that are either they're young folks that are looking at a career and looking at law enforcement or aviation. There's also cops that are sitting in a police car that are probably wondering, like, how do I get that job up there when they're standing in the rain and that helicopter circling overhead, or in the cold or whatever heat, whatever.
Or back at the hangar.
Yes,
TV.
yes, or when they hear, we're responding from the hangar. But so John started this podcast in a way to, you know, inspire, tell some stories of folks that are in these jobs, how they got into it, their path to get into that seat. And he had me on the podcast early on, and then hit me up and asked me if I'd like to join him on it. And I couldn't have thought of a better way to do it. I'd actually kind of considered maybe doing a podcast. I'd been listening to you guys for quite a while, and thought it was always such a great medium. And I didn't know the first thing about podcasting, so
Neither do we.
I had to have somebody smarter than I had to have somebody smarter
Still
than
don't
me
know much.
to start that. And so anyway, so John started it, and then I joined him, and you know, it's just been a great way for us to not only you know, hopefully inspire some folks to get into the job, but for other folks to, you know, hear other people's stories. And I think that's always inspiring. And so that's what we started doing. And it's been great. We've had great reception. It's the Hangar Z podcast, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon. It's everywhere now, I think. So all the popular podcasting apps. We do have a website. It's hangarzpodcast.com, and we have links to our, you know, previous episodes on there, and we're releasing one usually every couple weeks. And it's, like I said, it's been a lot of fun to talk about the equipment guys are using, and a lot of the discussions like we're having today is on our podcast. Pretty much all around aviation.
Very cool.
Very
you know,
cool.
I think our missions complement each other well, and that's one of the neat things. When I first started seeing posts about the Hangar Z podcast, I wanted to check it out because obviously we're interested in law enforcement and aviation, and you guys are law enforcement aviation, right? And
Yep.
if someone is looking to specialize in that particularly, I think Hangar Z is a great first place to go. And start building up your awareness of the community that is law enforcement aviation, which I think is cool. I think that's all I've got.
It is a small community, airborne law enforcement. You know, there's not a lot of guys out there doing that when you look at the numbers. And so everybody kind of knows everybody, or knows, you know, it's very few degrees of separation in airborne law enforcement. So it's a great community to be in. And, you know, John and I are very happy to be able to put this product out there, especially over this last year with COVID and, you know, a lot of the training seminars and stuff like that being canceled. This is a way for us to kind of bring that community together like I said, we're getting some good feedback from it. We're getting messages from folks in Australia and Europe and everywhere else that are, really appreciate what we're doing. And that means a lot to us.
Yeah, it's awesome. Make sure you guys go check out the Hangar Z podcast. You know where to find them. We'll put some links up. This episode is brought to you by Mantis. Mantis is a firearms training tool that tracks the movement in your gun so that you can step up your performance with good data and feedback. Not only does it help you stay accountable and make training more enjoyable and cost-effective, it also works in dry fire so you can train at home. I swear by dry fire training, and I use the Mantis every single time. If your shooting will have real-life consequences, use the Mantis to take your shooting to the next level. Get one and go join our training group in the Mantis app. You can find them at mantisx.com.
This episode is also brought to you by Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution. Drip Drop was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption of water and electrolytes into the parts of your body that need it. You can find it on dripdrop.com or even on Amazon. And if you're military or law enforcement and your organization's training or operating where it's hot out, have your supply guy buy it for you. It's available in bulk on GSA Advantage and through the National Stock Number System.
Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And that's all I got. Anyone else? Last thoughts?
No.
Right on.
I appreciate you guys taking the time out to talk to me.
Yeah, thanks for being here, and I thought it was a great discussion. So
you're very articulate and very good at explaining what organizationally we need to get right, which was cool. Yep. I like that.
Good stuff.
That's been a passion of mine, and hopefully we'll figure it out one day.
One day.
All right, guys, that's all we got. Good talk.